Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about digital overwhelm and ADHD, and I have a very special guest today to join me to talk about that. His name is Craig Mattson. He is an organisational researcher and professor at Calvin University. He is also the author of Digital Overwhelm, a mid-career guide to coping at work, and he has done some original research on the disconnection and intensity that many American workers feel in their organisational communities, and he's also built a practical framework called mode switching, which I think will be very interesting to dive into what that means. So welcome to the show, Craig. How are you doing today?
I think I'm doing all right. The times are intense. They're full of pressures, and sometimes it feels like, we're all sort of carrying our own histories, and then we've got all these sort of indeterminate futures, and we're just trying to get stuff done. And it's a lot, but I am so pleased to be with you, Laurence. Thanks for making space for me on your show.
No worries. I'm looking forward to this topic today, and I think I think when I look back at stuff that conversations that I've had on the podcast or things that I've put out on social media, this is one of the more popular topics. And I think even from my own experience as well, I would class as mid-career, and I left my previous job due to overwhelm. This all coincided with me discovering that I had ADHD. So really diving into digital overwhelm and just overwhelm in the workplace generally is something that I think is very valuable to the listeners, and any guidance on that is really important.
Glad.
So tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to researching digital overwhelm.
Yes, I'm happy to talk about where I come from. There is one of the oldest writings about engaging media is Plato's dialogue. It's called the Phaedrus. And the very first line is Socrates asking someone, "Where are you going? And where are you coming from?" And I always feel like those questions are like the start of every podcast. Where do you think you're going? And where did you come from? So yes, I started my career in radio, and I would not want anybody to go back and listen to my decade of radio hosting, but I was a music show host for 10 years out of college. And I learned a lot of stuff about trying to interact with strangers that way. And then after sort of well into that, I was like, I sure would like to think more carefully about what we're doing here in the radio studio every day. And so I went back to school and studied communication at a doctoral level. And that might sound kind of pretentious. You have a doctorate in communication, so you think a lot about what we all know how to do already. So yeah, that's me. I've studied in-depth things that are very ordinary and everyday. So yeah, in the last 10 years or so, I've been at 2 different colleges, universities, and in both of them, I became very interested in organizational communication and how our workplaces function and how we can, like I said at the start, like how we can be who we are with our own strange histories, and how we can, sort of stand with each other with the kind of decidedly undecided futures of our organizations. So just so many institutions today feel kind of janky, and we're like, I don't know how this is gonna go, but I got to get this email sent. So
I mean, there's just a couple of things that have popped up into my brain while she was talking. This idea of I've gone to study communication, and it's like everybody knows how to do that. But I think you look at where we are today, and it seems like people are forgetting how to communicate.
Too close, too on the nose there. Yeah. I was recently talking with someone who's doing consulting in this field, and I was like, do people really need consultancy? Like, isn't this sort of middle school stuff? We know how to talk with one another. And he said, yeah, we do, but we keep forgetting. And
Mm,
I think that's the pattern.
mm.
Learn, forget, learn, forget, learn, forget.
Well, I mean, I've often thought that the way that we have transitioned since the Industrial Revolution to more training ourselves in one particular skill for a
Mhm,
lifetime. Obviously that's changing a little bit more now. People
mhm,
change career a lot in their lives, but in that specialization, we are sort of forgetting how to be generalized and forget how to
mhm.
do. There's sometimes schools forget to just train basic things like how to manage my finances or how to look after my nutrition and things like that at the expense
Mhm.
of things that perhaps you won't use.
Yeah, in defense of the professors, it does feel like the ground conditions change under us as we're designing our courses. We're like, what do people actually need to know today? What do they know coming into my classroom? What are they going to need to know in the workplace? And sometimes it feels like a grab bag. You're like, well, hope this helps. And inevitably you leave things out. And I think what you've named there as like generalized life equipment is what we need to stay human with each other. And so that's why I'm a little chagrined sometimes when I think about how simple my field is. But the sometimes the simple sort of elementary school things of how do you talk to another person in a way that shows honor, respect, and communicates their worth and manages to be creative and funny at the same time, like that's good human stuff.
Mm,
And I think our workplaces suffer when we forget that, what you called that
mm.
generality.
And I think you were talking about workplace communication, and
Mm,
sometimes it
mhm,
feels like organizations tend to jump on the bandwagon and say, well, everybody else is doing this, so we must have one of these as well. And so there's less intention about why they might communicate in a certain way and not really
mm,
understand what effect that might be having on the people that work there.
mm.
Just because everybody has email or Slack or video chat, and rather than really sort of looking at the benefits and or some of the not so beneficial things.
Yes. I think as I interviewed dozens of working professionals, mostly in the Gen Z and millennial demographics, I encountered a lot of digital tools, like people using a lot of different kinds of tools. And often their organizations were using these tools in rather unreflective ways. It's hard to be reflective about your tools when you're just trying to get a lot of tasks done. So I'm hopeful that this book can help people to sit back for a moment and say, yeah, like, what are we doing here with these really powerful instruments? How can we use our digital tools to align with the kinds of humans we really want to be? That's my goal,
Yeah.
anyway.
So let's turn our attention to the book then, because I think there are a lot of topics in there, some really good chapters on things that I think people with ADHD um, have particular responses to or challenges with. So I think it would be interesting to dive into a few of those. But first of all, if you might be able to just, from a broad sense, tell us a bit about what the aims with the book were. Tell us about DigiWhelm and maybe go into mode switching a little bit.
I'd be delighted to. And I also should say that I'm excited about this conversation with you, Laurence, on ADHD goals because I'm eager to learn. Like, what are the implications of this research for neurodivergent folks? Some of my research participants were self-identified as neurodivergent. I don't know if I could say a majority of them, but some of them did.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I asked a very simple question to all of these working professionals. How are you dealing? Some of that was shaped by the fact that we were in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and it was intense and racial upheaval in the United States was pronounced and the ever-present climate doom felt imminent with the pandemic itself. And so, how are you coping? How are you dealing with these intensities? And I took a lot of notes, and they told a lot of stories. And I took some more notes, and then I went back and thought about those notes, and it's like, what's the pattern here? What's the story in all this? And that's where I came up with the term digital overwhelm. I'm sure I could have named the book with 6 other titles because there are lots of overwhelms that we face. But this was a conspicuous one in the stories that they told. And so I decided to go through and look at 6 ways that these working professionals were coping with that digital overwhelm. What were the modes, I called them, for dealing with that sense that, wow, technology is accelerating in its development. And I have a lot of feelings about that. How do you cope with that? And so I noticed 6 ways that people coped. And I tried to use simple language to describe these because I kind of wanted to use the language that the people were using in their stories. So I didn't want to use like communication theory language, which I'm much more familiar with. So I just called these modes things like emailing things. That's a mode. When you feel overwhelmed, we're like, we need an email here, or we need 6 emails. Another mode would be just saying things like, let's have a conversation. That's how we can deal with the intensity and the pressure and the overwhelm right now. We need to talk face to face. Or on Zoom. And then another mode would be meaning things. And I found that, to my surprise, people really wanted to talk about what their work meant. They didn't just want to talk about what they did at work. They wanted to talk about its significance or its insignificance. And then other modes would be like signaling things, advocating things, fixing things when your tools break down,
Yeah.
which is a glorious moment. So these 6 modes then became the sort of chapters in the book. And after each chapter, I would have a sort of half chapter, I called it. And that was a mode switch workshop. So every mode has its strengths and its weaknesses, its vices and its virtues. And so it's important, I came to think, that you not get stuck in one mode that you happen to be very good at or you happen to be very comfortable with. But to learn to switch among the modes is an important kind of art and craft that we need to practice in the workplace. So that's my skinny summary of the book.
Mode switching in itself, if I was to think about some of the things that people with ADHD come to me and talk about or a common complaint that I hear is that they can get very distracted when they are maybe hyper-focusing on one particular topic, and then somebody, because they're in the office, somebody taps them on the shoulder and asks them something, and then they've come out of hyper-focus, they've had to switch focus to something else brief to communicate with somebody, and then they can't start on what they were doing previously, and it can be a big challenging thing. So I wonder what advice in general about mode switching would you advise, or maybe if it's a case of learning how to mode switch but also being able to set boundaries about how often you switch modes, if that is a challenge.
Okay. Oh, I like that. So I may have to ask you a response question. Let me give you my kind of conventional answer, and then let's see how that works in terms of ADHD. So most of the advice that I see about dealing with technological fatigue and digital overwhelm tends to be some variation on you should use tech less often. So, or you should use, in some of the better expressions, you should use tech more purposefully. And one way to describe that philosophy is Cal Newport's concept of like digital minimalism. Make sure that when you're using a piece of tech, a digital tool, that its use and its biases, so to speak, align with your goals. Like, what are you trying to do? And is this the tool for that? Really wonderful and marvelous wisdom there. My book recommends something different, not to exactly contradict that, but to say, hey, we not only need digital minimalism, we also need digital flexibility. So we need to say, is this, it's a similar question, but it's maybe a bit more of an abundance mindset, you might say. It's a glorious thing that we have lots of modes of communication. It's a handsome condition, as John Durham Peters might say. He's a communication scholar who's been really important in my work. It's a handsome condition. And so having a portfolio of modes to adapt to the particulars of this context in this moment, on this day, and with this person or these people, that's hugely important and also very difficult. So that's why I recommend mode switching. But I wonder how might you hear that, Laurence?
So without, so if I put myself in the situation of first hearing about being encouraged to be more flexible, I would say that a lot of people with ADHD would initially go, okay, I need to be flexible, and then there would be an impulse to do whatever anybody else was asking them, and you find it very difficult because they'd be jumping onto busy or urgent tasks that somebody else deemed busy because they can see a message come up on Slack there, they've got an email that's just popped up there, and they are then saying to themselves, oh, I've got to shift very quickly between the two. But as I explained before, that can be very difficult to turn the attention if it requires some thought. And then we'll get onto RSD in a bit. But if you've got to respond to that with a message, somebody with ADHD may take a lot of time because they're fearing what the response will be if they say something wrong. So I would say being 100% flexible is a challenge, but what I would, a middle ground that I would say, which again is something very difficult for people with ADHD to do instinctively, is to maybe look at something like time blocking, where they can set out portions of a day and throughout a week where they give specific attention to one of those modes so that they can allow themselves to hyper focus and not get distracted from other things. They can do that, but then give themselves maybe a gap in between where they can refuel, recharge, distract themselves with something else so that they can then go back into a different mode but then give it some attention.
So let me ask a question. I guess my book is assuming that one of the problems in the workplace is that we get stuck in a particular mode. Like, this is how we're going to communicate here. I'm going to write you a long email, and you're going to write me a long email, and then I'm going to write you another long email, and so forth, until we get this figured out. And my book assumes that we get stuck in that. Or maybe the assumption is we really aren't going to solve this problem unless we talk face to face and talk it out right now. Or perhaps, to use another mode, perhaps we should say less, but we should just say it a lot. Like, let's text one another. And we'll do like a million very short, blurby sort of texts to one another. That's how we'll get this solved. So my book assumes that stuckness is the problem. Yeah. Would you say, actually, for someone who's experiencing ADHD conditions, stuckness isn't the problem? Maybe a sort of hyper-reactiveness is the problem? Or yeah, that's a question. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, hyper-reactiveness, I think, is a problem at the cost of getting through your own priorities, I would say. Setting boundaries is a really big challenge that people with ADHD have. And so if you're, like that example you gave of let's have lots of mini text messages in order to solve this, if that was going on, then I think it would be very difficult for them to be able to think about anything else until it was resolved. They wouldn't be able to go back to doing something else in the meantime.
Right.
And so whilst that style of communication might be good for the other person, it's completely destructive for someone with ADHD.
Yes. Okay, that helps me understand. So I guess to kind of to bridge between what you're describing and what I was writing and researching, I think that getting stuck looks different for different people. So it might seem like you're highly mobile and you're doing a lot of sort of flexible things by getting involved in this Twitter fight or this texting exchange. there's a lot of stuff seeming to happen, but actually you're kind of stuck, right? You're stuck in this one mode and it's very unproductive, or at least for you it is. It's not allowing you to do the kind of work that you really need to do. So I think I appreciate the sort of corrective you're offering me because I think that sometimes my assumption is from my own experience that my problem is I get sort of arthritic or rigid in a particular way about communicating. Like, this is the best way and the good way to resolve this workplace dispute or difference. And you're reminding me that sometimes, I mean, what is going to be better for the other person is that's the mode I should shift to. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like, how does your neighbor in this moment need to be engaged? And if that sort of, it's kind of like sending an email at 10:30 at night might not be the best way to care for someone, to respect someone, or even to get an appropriate response from someone. And so, like, what's going to be best for this person? It might be good for me to delay send this. It was good for me to write it right now because it's on my mind, but it might not be good for them to receive it right before they're trying to go to sleep. So yeah, I think keeping your head up and looking around and asking what modes does my team need or does this person need is really the wisdom that I think is sort of emerging from
Yeah.
our exchange here.
Well, another thing that comes to mind, and I wonder if this sort of comes under one of your chapters saying, which is advocating things. But I think it's important when thinking about maybe workplace accommodations, if an organization, from the organizational point of view, if they are looking at saying, okay, let's tackle neurodiversity at work and get some workplace accommodations in place for, let's say, specifically ADHD, there's a danger that they might just say, what does an ADHD person look like? What are their challenges? Let's put something in place for a general ADHD person, and then say, right, we've dealt with that now, got these things. If you've got ADHD, this is how we're going to deal with you, and that's that. We've ticked that box. Let's move on and feel very good about ourselves. If you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD.
I see.
It's all the different executive function challenges that are possible. They might have to varying degrees, like you'd see on a graphic equalizer on a stereo or something, and however they are, ever they're at, it dictates how they respond to different things, which may be different person to person. So when being, like you were saying, like being considerate to what's the best way to communicate with that other person, it would be an individual thing to have that sort of communication rather than just saying, okay, this is how we deal with people with ADHD, because that might not be helpful.
Yeah, I love your example of the equalizer, the stereo equalizer. Every week I come into a podcast studio. I'm sitting in it right now. And you can see that there are, even in my blurry background, there are some sort of fixed things about the studio, like the acoustic treatment on the wall. We don't move that around. And the acoustic treatment that hangs from the ceiling, we don't move that around. But it seems like every single week, my podcast, we have 5 people in it, and every single week there's some new variable that I have to like sort through, like, why is that person's volume so low? And why is, this person sits too far from the mic, I'm going to have to adjust that in post. Or somebody can't hear anything in their headphones, and so what is going on? And I have to crawl around under the table and figure out where that wire is hanging, and the plug got pulled out by some earlier user. So there are so many variables, and I think it's really hard to be a manager these days, because I think, first of all, it's wonderful that we feel freer to bring more of ourselves to work, to say, like, these are the constraints I'm actually dealing with. I'm not just some homogenized working unit that you have hired. I've got a whole history, and I've got a whole psychology and spirituality and all of the things about being a human. Bring in all of that here. And the manager, like, it is a little bit like you're crawling around trying to figure out what wire is not plugged in or what potentiometer hasn't been adjusted correctly. And so I feel for the managers in that. But I think that if you're going to work with humans, That's again, the flexibility that you're going to need.
Mm. I've come across people talking about management styles,
Mm,
particularly post-COVID, and the
hmm
conversation about, we've obviously seen how the workplace can work in a flexible way, people being able to work from home and chat on video like we are now. And then everyone thought that was the dawn of more flexible working. And then a year or so after people were able to go back into the office, you could see some
hmm
managers saying, okay, well, I think my job will be easier if I can see you working. And there you start to see it creep back in, people throwing away what they learned, the lessons that they learned
Yeah.
from COVID.
Yes.
And you ask
Yes.
yourself, okay, but why are we doing, why is it just because your life is easier as a manager that you can see us and you can ask us things individually rather than us feeling happier that we are able to feel like we can be flexible or to be trusted or X, Y, and Z?
That's a very accurate and damning analysis, I'm afraid. I remember talking with a research participant, let me say, who that language of subject is very old fashioned. We should shed that. The research participant is a much better way to talk about it. But we actually met in a sort of post interview, and we were just having coffee at a shop as we hadn't been able to do in our first interview. And she described the situation of back when return to office was sort of new, like the managers were beginning, like you just said, to say, maybe we should all be back in office. And she commented as a woman professional just how complicated it was to be back in office. In some ways, it's wonderful to very efficiently be able to communicate things non-verbally and verbally in a richer way. But also, she mentioned that the complexities of proximity to her male boss, the way the boss might sort of lean towards her or sort of lean over her desk and look over her shoulder to screen. There's a certain amount of discomfort in that and unwanted proximity, maybe, perhaps far away from harassment or something like that, but just like a certain level of performance that she felt obligated to sort of bring to the work. And yeah, that's not so great.
Mm.
I think I'm on team hybrid when it comes to how to arrange things. That seems like there's some real gifts that come with being in person that are sort of indispensable, I want to say gently. But then I think that, yeah, people's lives are so complicated that it seems best to have, again, that sort of organizational flexibility to say, yeah, come in twice a week. That'll give us a chance to do the proximal stuff we need with embodied togetherness, in person community. But then, yeah, let's do the extra work to make virtual meetings and virtual managing, which is really its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Remote managing is a skill, a whole set of skills, and let's make that happen. So that's sort of where I've landed on that one.
You mentioned the hybrid working, and as I was listening to you talk about that, and I was thinking back to what you were saying about mode switching and the sort of solution that we got to there. In my personal experience, going back to hybrid working, I would really enjoy, on one level, I would really enjoy the social interaction that I would get from seeing my colleagues. I loved the time being spent laughing and joking and what have you, and being part
Mm,
of that community aspect. And yes, there was opportunities for people to resolve things quickly in a face-to-face conversation rather than a back and forth communicating via email or messaging. But that was at the expense of doing focus work on my priority things. So whilst it was
mhm,
better in one sense for certain things, it was detrimental to me getting anything done that were my main priorities. So it brings me back to thinking about the expectations and mode switching is if we go into a hybrid, is it okay for the managers to
mm,
accept that when people are in the office, they're going to work on specific communication based things and then anticipate
mm,
that the more focused work will get done on the days when they're not in the office? Because I think
mm.
that can be the challenge
Mm,
for people is the expectation of how are you expecting me to get that done today? I'm in the office doing these
mhm.
things for you. So
Yes, wasn't the pandemic a 3-year tutorial in how long or how short things take? We had to rejigger all of that. The meme about like, well, I all of a sudden found all these meetings could be emails. And I think, yeah, I think we should ongoingly assess like what's an appropriate amount of time for this task? How can we do the task humanely and in a way that isn't just about this particular deadline, but is about the overall well-being of our workplace? So, in answer to your question, like I do think managers should scale their expectations. If we're in person, we're going to be doing a different kind of work. I have you heard of the distinction between how does that go? It's ROI and VOI, something like this kind of catchy thing that workplace journalists are always trying to trot out. But ROI is the sort of quantitative, moneyed kind of measure for things. And there's also value on investment or values on investment. And that's a little harder to quantify. So I think maybe those in-person days might be a little bit bigger on the VOI than on the ROI.
mm,
I'll try that out on you, Laurence. We'll see what you
yeah,
think.
no, I'm thinking when I hear the term values, it takes me back to sort of those company documents that say, what are our values? And I do think I've worked in places where there was a very heavy focus on it was a small team, and we did enjoy the fact that we were a close sort of family, as it were, and everybody did enjoy that aspect of it. People did enjoy going into work. But then as companies grow, those things do change, and sometimes the
Hmm.
value of being heavy on communication and having a good time can also mean that productivity is low, and that changes as companies grow. But
Hmm.
yeah, no, I think it's important that you have to enjoy work, and work does have to be an exciting thing to do, particularly for people with ADHD, because once something becomes boring or they don't get any dopamine from how interesting something is, it can be
Hmm.
very difficult to then bring yourself to do it or complete it.
Yes, that does sound right. And for you and I are kind of talking across an aisle here because I feel like I do have some attention deficit symptoms, but I haven't ever been diagnosed as having ADHD. So I don't want to pretend to a kind of knowledge I don't have. But what you're describing there sounds familiar and sounds recognizable for everybody in the workplace. Perhaps people with ADHD experience this in a way that makes them more articulate about it too. Like you're just able to name this thing that is going on in the workplace, and maybe that's a gift that you can bring to your coworkers. Has anybody noticed those sorts of things? Like sometimes I'm just too embedded in tasks to like step back and say, "Oh, yeah, that is weird." Like that is very strange about our working community. I wonder how that sounds to you. Is that patronizing? I mean, do you feel like having this condition does enable you to see things that other people miss?
That I think there's lots of different levels to that. In terms of me being able to articulate that to you, probably comes from doing a year of doing this podcast and
Okay.
thinking about it a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but I think, I mean, I suppose it's important to make distinguish between what we
Okay.
mean by people suffering with ADHD and
Mm,
neurotypical people suffering with executive dysfunction. I
mm,
think somebody with biological ADHD, that's due to there being fewer dopamine receptors fueling the brain and allowing the part of the brain with executive
mhm.
function to be able to process complex
I see.
tasks at work, emotional regulation, time management, those sort of things.
Right.
So that's something that they've lived with their entire life, and from an internal perspective, they've built up a lifetime of labels of maybe feeling slightly different, paying to a lot of attention to the way people communicate and go, "Oh, why are they finding that so much easier?" and masking essentially. Whereas if we switch to talking about the general population and executive dysfunction, the
Mm,
society that we live in now is crashing our baseline dopamine levels from digital overwhelm, from diet and exercise and
Yes.
all things like that. So there is an uptick, and it's getting bigger, of people having executive dysfunction due to style. So,
Oh,
so
yes.
the biggest difference I would say would be you're facing the same challenges, but somebody with ADHD may have a lot of internal RS. We talked about RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, a lot of an overactive chimp in fight, flight, or freeze mode that is also preventing them from doing things that are challenging.
I see. That's super helpful to me, especially when you said someone who's experiencing this condition biologically has a certain number of, what was it, receptors in your brain that's going to constrain you in a biological way. The other people in the office with different sort of biologies or neurophysiologies might also feel constraint, but those constraints might be somewhat external. They might be tech. The dudes in the hoodies who are always churning out this new tech that we've all got to deal with somehow and integrate into our workflows, those create or encourage a certain kind of distractedness. So you might have two people, I'm trying to sort of paraphrase what you're saying to make sure I understand it. You might have two people sitting next to each other who are responding in similar ways to what's happening in the workplace, but one person might be suffering from what you called executive dysfunction, and the other person might have a biologically diagnosable condition that's related to some hardwiring in the brain. So I think people who study attention these days talk about how we are forming our brains. And so those technological features of our lives might be, in a sense, like reshaping our neurophysiologies. I heard somebody talking recently about how during COVID, he just had more time to read. And he said, it felt like my brain just relaxed and my brain just loved the feeling of this sort of extended, deep reading. And I sort of adored that description because I think I know what he means. And so, yeah, I appreciate your insight maybe a few minutes back in our conversation that we really shouldn't forget what we learned during that difficult time of the pandemic. And so I hope some of this conversation can help us all to sort of recover some of the things we noticed and the things we lived through there.
Well, I mean, there's lots of directions to go just in that last few things that you said. Yeah, I mean, one other thing, maybe it was because we spoke last week about this conversation we're going to have today, and I don't know if I then went away and had a think. I walked my dog, and I was thinking about where we are as humans and where we are today and the world that we live in. And I was thinking about the definition of, or describing it in a way as like, we've got the same hardware as we did when we were hunter-gatherers. We've got our physical bodies, and the way they operate is exactly the same as what they did when we were going around the savannah and looking for food to eat. But with the software, this is an analogy where I have to go with it, but the software we adapt is adapting to the surroundings, the culture, the technology, the politics, etc. And that has to upgrade constantly to deal with where we are, where we are as a society. And I think that we're at a stage now where this is where the analogy works, is that sometimes your computer gets too old that it can't handle the new software update that it needs. And I think that we're in an age now where it's like, whoa, the thing that we're trying to do with our bodies, we can't actually necessarily do it with the hardware we've got. So what should we do? Do we take a step back and say, okay, we do have to go for a walk, like as you were saying, what we learned in COVID, saying we do need to sit and have a long read or go outside and have a long walk. We can't just connect it to our devices the whole time and creating 24/7 because we're going to be sad.
I really love your image of the software updates. First of all, I hate software updates. I mean, the benefits seem so obscure. But yeah, I think mode switching sometimes entails saying, could I go back a few versions in the software and the operating system? I found myself doing this. For instance, I journal in the mornings about the conversations of the day before, and I do that longhand. And so that is in some ways like going back a few updates back when people wrote by hand. But there's something that's centering about that, and it moves at a different cadence than my typing does. I also love to type, and I sometimes feel like that enables me to think better. But yeah, I think moving among those modes, COVID sort of helped us to recover some modes that we might have otherwise just sort of gradually forgotten. One more thing, Laurence, I was thinking too that like so many of the softwares and devices in our lives pretend to be able to basically handle it all for us. So like all of your interactions you can do on Microsoft Teams. Like everything you need is there supposedly. Or so there's a sort of multifunctional pretense that new technologies often present us with. I've started to become fond of technologies that say, we just do this one thing. We just do this one thing. Something like a Kindle reader. It's not going to connect you to the universe. It's just going to help you read books. So, yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, in my experience working in a digital agency, so we were constantly being updated with new tools that did one specific thing, and then you like, okay, can we justify getting this one specific thing because it does this one thing that we now need to do? But then after a while, once they've been in business for a few years, they go, oh, how can we get more people on board?
Yeah, okay.
They start growing the features, and then it competes with the thing, it overlaps with the thing that you already have for doing something else. And you're like, okay, well, which one do I get? Because it can be difficult to have lots of specialized tools, but then the information is kept siloed in all of those, and really you need to be able for them to be able to talk to each other. But it goes back to what you were saying about you write things down. I love what happens when I write things. It feels more I'm connected more creatively to what I'm thinking, and maybe more it's easier for ideas to come. So I love writing things down, but then I may never look at them again. With the beauty of digital stuff is that you can carry it around with you all the time, and they can be connected, but it doesn't feel as creative to work in that space all the time. It becomes a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's very relatable for my experience too. Yeah, that makes sense. I've tried to discipline myself to go back and look at things that I've written down, and because I don't know that you get a whole lot of benefit. I mean, there's some benefit of just writing in the moment, gives you another chance to think it through. But I have found some value in, for instance, in sort of morning spiritual exercises to like decide something on Sunday and sort of write it in your journal, and then keep going back to that, and then like, how's that going today? How's that going Tuesday? How's that going Thursday? And so forth. There's something about writing that, again, it slows you down and requires you to be somewhat labored in if you're going to get any usefulness out of it.
Well, I would totally agree with what you're saying, because recently, since the beginning of the year, I have become a bit more analog in my organization and planning, because I find it very difficult. And I use digital apps, but then my digital apps, like my to-do list, just becomes like a black hole of ideas. Whereas I've been more disciplined to print out a weekly planner and a daily sheet for each day, to just say at the beginning of the day and then at the end of the day, and what I plan to do that day, and also reflect on it in the evening. And it's become a lot better, although I'll have to throw the pieces of paper away, and I can't access it if I go away from the office or whatever. But in terms of keeping me focused, it's been incredible.
It's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think we have to negotiate some kind of balance between like access and reflection? That feels like the dynamics at play here. Like, writing allows me to reflect. I can think, but I don't always have access to it. And so like when my wife and I are like, what's happening today? It's really invaluable to have like that digital calendar at hand to be able to quickly say, okay, I'm not available at 2:15 today, but we can meet at 4:30 or whatever. So yeah, maybe we're always negotiating some kind of relationship or interaction between what do I need to think about and then what do I need to be able to quickly access. Both those things seem to matter.
Well, yeah, and I suppose that is the tough thing. There are
Mm.
amazing benefits of being connected digitally with other people to have shared calendars. I mean, I think about it in from the experience of co-parenting, being able to do that digitally is important, but it doesn't always work for everything because, like I say about the creativity aspect. And I suppose one thing I've been trying to be more disciplined about is the calendar being almost like becoming a sacred space for when things are done. Because sometimes I can dump a lot of things into a to-do list or like a planning thing. But then when you're then, you're in a planning tool, but then you've got your calendar, you're fighting for priority about which one's more important.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and sometimes I think you've got to
Yeah.
have a holding pen for
Oh, I like
things
that.
you need to remember, but then they don't get done until you put them in the calendar.
Yeah, like our calendars reflect deep values. Like this meeting with this person is really important. It's going to go on the calendar.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really like that notion of the calendar as like a sort of sacred space that houses or holds the things we deeply care about. And then you need some other spaces as well where you can just kind of scribble and pence and think about things. That's
Yeah,
cool.
so for if I was to extend it back to sort of what we've been discussing and maybe looking at boundary setting and mode switching, in the calendar you might have time slots for where you say this needs to be time where I am open to communicating with my team members, and that is a space where they can do that with you. But then there needs to be a space where you say, right, I'm going to work on one specific project thing, and that is on that. And then the next day,
Hmm.
for an hour or two, I might be then saying, this is where I'm going to tick off some things from the to-do list. So it's kind of rigid and flexible. You've got
Mm.
working with your colleagues, working on one deep thing, and then a space where you can, you've fenced it off, but you're going to put in little jobs that you don't know what they
Hmm.
are until you get to them.
I've noticed that you often speak of boundary setting and the ways that other people's priorities can kind of be difficult to negotiate, especially if you have ADHD. Is there some kind of relationship between that diagnosable condition and something like a concern for pleasing people?
Oh yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
that's the RSD, the rejection sensitive dysphoria. Everybody feels rejection from time to time, but what
Hmm.
RSD is, it's an overwhelming reaction to
Mm.
rejection. That might be
Okay.
a physical feeling, and that's not that it's an overwhelming reaction to rejection, but also a perceived rejection. So that may have been a rejection that actually took place. You may have had an argument with somebody, and you're like, "Oh, I'm really sad about that now." But it might be to something that hasn't happened and may not ever happen, but you think it's
Mm.
going to happen, and therefore have a physical response to it.
Hmm.
And email something as simple as email might be one of
Hmm.
those things that triggers that thing. You feel like you're going to get found out, that you don't know what you're doing, and so you're
Yes.
very, or you think, or you somebody a boss says, we need to talk. Let's talk tomorrow about, and but they don't say what it's about, and you're like, I'm going to get fired,
Right. Right.
and so that's one element of that. But in terms of the boundary setting, because you fear getting rejection, you people pleasing is a huge thing. So you do what
Mm.
everybody ever says straight away
Hmm.
as they ask you, but then you don't actually get done what you're there to do.
I see. Well, I guess I need to continue listening to ADHD goals. I'm learning quite a bit here. Thanks for that. I appreciate the coaching and the tutorial here too.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I think we could talk back and forth on lots of things. that come up in your book, I feel that we've barely scratched the surface. But in terms of, I suppose that leans into a little bit in terms of advocating. In your book, what do you say about advocating for things? Because I think that is something that is challenging. I might talk about setting boundaries, but that's because it's something that people with ADHD can struggle with. So what would your approach to advocating for things be?
I think recognizing that advocacy moves in multiple directions, often simultaneously. If boundary setting is an important aspect of working experience for people with ADHD, advocacy crosses boundaries, and it does so deliberately. Like boundaries that you didn't set, but that are set by maybe your manager or by your coworkers. But advocacy basically asks, like, does it need to be this way? Like the way it is, that how this should be? But the challenge of that is that you have to advocate internally, convince yourself and all the inner community of your heart that, wow, this matters. But then, yeah, you have to do the work of sometimes advocating to your coworkers, like, we should speak up about this matters, or this is not a good idea. And then there's the advocacy upward that is, depending on your experience, might be the hardest. I asked interviewees, what's hardest for you? Persuading yourself, persuading, your coworkers, or persuading upward to your managers or the company owners. And yeah, it just depended on their histories, what they would answer to that. But the tricky thing is we got to do all of it. Advocacy is easier to just say, I don't want to get in on that. I don't want to do it. It's too complicated. But that sort of boundary crossing in order to bring change is, I think, an indispensable part of a healthy workplace.
Yeah, I mean, the way you described that, it made me see so many connections with what we've discussed today in terms of you can only really advocate for something if you've at first thought about what things mean to you and what your values are as individuals and a company, be able to then advocate for what is right for everybody. I suppose you have to have an appetite for the company itself has to have an appetite for questioning, why are we doing this? Are we purposeful in doing this? Just because we've always done it this way, does it mean it's the right way? And you can only do that if you communicate and ask, how does everybody feel about this? What challenges are you having?
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Yes, you've named it. That's the multi-directional challenge of advocacy. We got to have it, and it's hard to do.
Yeah. I spoke to somebody yesterday, and they gave me a very good explanation. It's saying choose your hard. It's like, well, going to the gym is hard, but being out of shape is hard. So choose which one, because they're both hard. So choose which one you want to be better at, because
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I love that.
So, Craig, I'd love to get the listeners to, if you could tell the listeners where they can find you online, where they can get your book and follow you.
Thank you kindly. After you subscribe to ADHD Goals, you might check out themodeswitch.com. There you can find my weekly newsletter. I talk about this sort of stuff every week: work culture dynamics, organizational communication, digital overwhelm, all that. But you can also find the book on that site and some other books that I've written as well. So that's themodeswitch.com. And I'd be so pleased to connect with your listeners that way.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I will put a link to that in the show notes. And yes, I encourage everybody to check that out because it is a great book. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think we could probably talk about the nuances of it.
Yes, I feel the same. And it's really great to have a truly reciprocal conversation where we're bringing different gifts to the conversation. Your year, at least, of podcasting and conversation about ADHD and my research among rising professionals. It was a nice intersection, and I come away from it feeling better informed. So that's a great gift. Thanks.
Well, yeah, and just keep seeing patterns. But yeah, it's how we started in the first place, we were talking about communication, and I think we can only do that if we communicate back and forth and push things forward. So
Sure, sure.
it's
Yeah,
been
you be careful. You're gonna become a communication scholar very soon. You're on the edge. Watch out.
don't I mean the amount of things, the amount of courses that this is one of my,
Yeah,
I'd say,
yeah.
addictions is I'll get interested in something and then I'll be like, oh, I'll buy a course on that. Da, 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 da. So yeah, don't give me any
Don't tempt you.
ideas. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and take care.
Yes, you be well too.
Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.